She poured the drink directly onto Imani's camera bag. Not by accident, not from carelessness. She looked her dead in the eyes, smiled, and tipped the glass sideways, slow, deliberate, like she was watering a plant she wanted to kill. The ice cubes hit the leather first. Then the champagne followed, spreading dark and cold across equipment that cost Imani 3 years of weekend gigs and skipped vacations. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. 40-something people watched a woman's life savings absorb someone else's cruelty, and the only sound in that rooftop lounge was laughter. If you have ever walked into a room and felt the air shift against you, felt people decide who you were before you even opened your mouth, then you already know exactly what Imani Brooks felt in that moment. The question is, what would you have done next? Before we begin, if stories like this one speak to you, hit that subscribe button and follow along to the very end. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that Friday night in Seattle, where one woman's dignity and one silent man's patience were about to change everything. The evening had not started as a disaster. That was the part Imani would think about later, lying in a hotel room she almost did not get, staring at the water stains on a ceiling she had not planned to see. The evening had started the way most of her evenings started when she was traveling alone, quietly, independently, with a small plan and a reasonable expectation that the world would cooperate. She had been in Seattle for a travel assignment. 3 days, a roster of outdoor locations, and a hotel reservation she had confirmed twice. The boutique property near Pike Place Market. Decent reviews. Blackout curtains. A bathtub she had been thinking about since the red-eye from Atlanta. The front desk clerk had been polite in the way that people are polite when the news is bad. He had used words like unfortunately and system error and overbooked, which Imani had translated in her head as, "You don't have a room, and we are not especially sorry about it." They offered her a voucher for a nearby property. The nearby property was 40 minutes away by cab and smelled like industrial carpet cleaner. She had taken a breath, thanked the clerk in a tone she did not entirely feel, and walked back out into the Seattle rain. This was a thing about Imani that people sometimes mistook for weakness. She did not explode in lobbies. She did not make scenes at front desks. She had grown up watching her mother handle indignities with a kind of quiet steel that looked, from the outside, like grace, and sometimes was, but underneath was something harder. The decision not to let other people's failures become your public unraveling. So she walked. Not aimlessly. Imani Brooks had been navigating unfamiliar cities alone since she was 22 years old, and she had long ago learned that walking was how she reset. Camera bag over one shoulder, rolling suitcase bumping along wet sidewalk behind her, hood up against the drizzle. She pulled up her phone. She started looking for alternatives. The Meridian Grand was 4 blocks away. It was outside her assignment budget, and she knew it before she walked through the revolving door. But she had a credit card with enough room and the kind of exhaustion that makes expensive decisions feel reasonable. The lobby was the kind of marble and low lighting situation that usually made Imani feel like she was being assessed before she opened her mouth. But she was wet, and her camera bag strap had left a red groove across her shoulder, and she had exactly 0 patience left for aesthetic intimidation. The room situation was solvable. A king suite, more than she needed, more than she wanted to spend, but available. She handed over her card. She signed. She accepted her key packet and the bellhop's offer to take her bags with a polite refusal, because her camera bag did not leave her body in hotels, airports, or anywhere else. She asked the front desk clerk if there was somewhere in the building to get a quiet drink while her room was being prepared. He had gestured toward the elevator. 42nd floor, rooftop lounge. Views of Elliott Bay on a clear night, which this was not, but still. She thanked him. She rode the elevator up. She should have gotten room service. She would think that later, too. The lounge was the kind of place that made you feel like you had arrived somewhere, even if you weren't sure you'd been invited. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. Low tables with amber lighting. A bar that stretched half the room and was tended by 2 people who moved like they'd been choreographed. Music that was loud enough to feel but quiet enough to talk over. And people. 40, maybe 50 of them. The birthday group had claimed the north end of the room. That was obvious from the mylar balloons and the velvet rope someone had strung between 2 standing plants like they were marking territory. The birthday in question appeared to belong to a woman in her late 20s with cheekbones that suggested money and a dress that confirmed it. Her name, Imani would later learn, was Vanessa Harlow. At that moment, she was just a stranger in a good dress who seemed to be the gravitational center of the room. Imani found a seat at the far end of the bar, as far from the birthday apparatus as she could reasonably get. She ordered a ginger beer. She didn't want alcohol, just something to hold while she figured out the logistics of her night. And she set her camera bag carefully on the stool beside her. She was tired. Her shoulder ached. The rain had gotten into the neck of her jacket, and she was still faintly damp in that specific, miserable way. She pulled out her phone and started going through the photos she'd taken that afternoon before the hotel situation had derailed everything. She did what she always did when the world was giving her friction. She went back to the work. The first comment reached her indirectly, a laugh. Then a voice, not quite quiet enough, from somewhere behind her left shoulder. Did she bring her luggage to the bar? Imani did not turn around. She recognized the tone. Not the specific words, but the register, the performance quality of it, the way it was pitched to be heard. She had been hearing that tone since middle school. The voice that wasn't speaking to you, but at you. The comment designed to exist in that narrow space between audible and deniable. She looked at her photos. A shot of the waterfront, a woman selling flowers from a cart, a dog walking ahead of its owner, leash pulled taut. Another comment. Closer this time. I didn't know they let rooms up here. A cluster of laughter. Someone shushed someone else, the shush accompanied by more laughter, which meant the shush was not sincere. Imani set her phone down on the bar. She picked up her ginger beer. She looked straight ahead at the rows of backlit liquor bottles and the gray blur of the Seattle skyline beyond the glass, and she made a decision, quietly, inside herself, to stay exactly where she was. Because she had booked this hotel, because she had paid for this drink, because the alternative, packing up, retreating, taking herself and her camera bag and her $200 ginger beer back down 42 floors, was not about dignity. It was about something else. And she was not willing to give them that. She was, however, human, which meant the comments were landing, even though she was working very hard to look like they weren't. Across the room, at a corner table with a direct sight line to the bar, a man sat alone with a glass of water. He had been there for approximately 40 minutes. No one had approached him. No one had offered him a menu or asked if he was expecting company. The staff moved around his table with the careful efficiency of people who understood, without being told, that this particular guest required a specific kind of attention, meaning the kind where you were available if needed and invisible if not. He was Korean, somewhere in his mid-40s, dressed in a charcoal suit that had not come off a rack. His posture was the kind that develops over years of occupying rooms without needing to announce itself. He had taken off his jacket at some point during the evening and folded it over the chair beside him with the neat precision of someone who took care of things. His hands, resting on the table, were covered by a pair of dark gloves. He was watching the bar. Not aggressively, not obviously. The way a person watches something when they have nowhere else to be and nothing left to prove by looking away. He had noticed Imani the moment she walked in, not because she was remarkable, though she was, but because he noticed everyone who walked into a room. It was a survival habit, long past the point of being voluntary. He noticed the camera bag, the way she moved, the careful selection of the farthest available seat. He noticed the birthday group. He noticed the moment the comments started. He stayed very still. Imani became aware that someone was filming her. It was a particular feeling, not paranoia because she was a photographer herself, and she understood the geometry of someone pointing a lens. She felt it before she saw it. A shift in the energy to her right. She turned her head just slightly and clocked it. A woman in a gold top with her phone angled in Imani's direction, clearly in video mode, turned half away to disguise the intention. Imani looked back at the bar. Okay, she thought. Okay. The sound from the birthday section was getting louder. They had been drinking for a while, she could tell. The laughter had that quality of collective escalation, where each joke becomes the permission for the next one to go further. She caught fragments. References to her size. References to the camera bag. One extended bit, performed for a general audience of their own friends, about who let the tourist up here and what the vibe of the evening had been before she arrived. She could have left. She knew that. She was doing the math on it, actually, sitting there on her bar stool with her ginger beer going warm, running the calculation between what it would cost her and what it would cost her. Leave. Give them the satisfaction, Absorb the message that the room had decided she didn't belong in it. Stay. Endure whatever came next. The bartender caught her eye. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. He was maybe 24, 25, with the expression of someone who wanted to do something and had calculated the professional cost of doing it. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Don't. She didn't need a 24-year-old to lose his job over this. That was when the woman in the gold top walked over. She wasn't walking toward Amani exactly. She was walking past her. Except the route she took was unnecessarily close, close enough that when she lifted her glass and tilted it, there was nothing accidental about the angle. The champagne hit the camera bag first, ran down the strap, pooled on the seat of the stool, cold, immediate, unmistakable. Amani stood up. Not fast. She stood up the way her mother had taught her to stand up in situations like this, controlled, upright, without the body doing the panic work before the mind was ready. She looked at the woman. The woman looked back at her, phone still up, still filming, and she smiled. "Oops," she said. The word came out soft and sweet, like an apology that had decided not to be one. Behind her, from the birthday section, someone let out a laugh that broke the room open. And then everyone was laughing, and the phones were up. And Amani was standing there next to a champagne-soaked camera bag in a room full of people who had decided she was the evening's entertainment. She did not yell, she did not cry, she did not throw anything. She very carefully picked up her camera bag with both hands, unzipped the front pocket, and checked the lens cloth inside. It was damp at the corner. She blotted it. She re-zipped the pocket. She set the bag back down. She turned to the bartender. "Can I get a cloth, please?" He handed her one without speaking. His face was doing something complicated. "Thank you," she said, and she wiped down the strap. The laughter didn't stop immediately, but it shifted, took on a different quality, like they had expected something from her and she had failed to provide it, and they weren't entirely sure what to do with that. From the corner table, the man with the gloves watched all of this without moving. What happened in the next 20 minutes was the kind of thing that happens when a group of people has been given permission and has not encountered a limit. A chair disappeared. She turned around and the stool she'd been sitting on was gone, moved, slid away while she was standing, and when she looked for it, someone in the birthday group had it and was using it as an extra seat. And when she made eye contact with the person using it, they shrugged with the practiced vacancy of someone who had never once in their life been told no by a person who had the authority to make it stick. She went to the manager. The manager was a man in his early 50s in a blazer that had seen better years. He listened to her with the expression of someone calculating something on a different screen from the one their face was presenting. She explained, clearly and without drama, what had happened. The drink, the filming, the chair. She pointed to the still damp strap of her camera bag. He said he would look into it. He said it in a way that meant he would not. She asked him directly, "Are you going to ask them to stop?" He said he understood her frustration. She said, "That's not what I asked." He said the guests in question were long-standing patrons of the property and that he was sure it was all just high spirits, and he hoped she could understand that these situations were sometimes more complicated than they appeared from the outside. She looked at him for a long moment. "I see," she said, which was true. She walked back toward the bar. The birthday group had noticed the manager conversation and seemed energized by it. The fact that she had gone to the authority and the authority had done nothing was apparently excellent material. More phones went up. A running commentary was being delivered to whoever was watching the live stream. Amani sat back down on the stool someone had quietly returned. Not the birthday group, a different guest, a middle-aged man in a brown jacket who had slid it back without making a production of it. She sat down. She looked at her camera bag. She thought about the photos on her card. She thought about the teenagers back in Atlanta who took her photography classes on Saturday mornings and called her Miss Imani and showed up even in winter. She thought, some battles are beneath you, not because you can't fight them, because the fight itself is the point of the trap. She made a decision. She zipped her camera bag fully. She stood up. She put the strap over her shoulder. She left enough cash on the bar to cover the drink and a tip that the bartender had earned 10 times over. She nodded to the man in the brown jacket who had returned her stool. She started walking toward the elevator. "Leaving already?" The voice carried from the birthday section. More laughter, a brief smattering of applause. She kept walking. The elevator was on the far side of the room, 40 feet maybe. 40 feet of carpet and ambient music and 40-something people with their phones out watching her go. She was aware of every step, aware of the camera bag bouncing slightly against her hip, aware of the champagne stain she could still feel on the strap. She was halfway there when she heard a voice, not loud, not performing, aimed at her and only at her. Are you leaving because you want to, or because they decided you should? She stopped. She turned. The man from the corner table was standing 4 feet away. He hadn't moved loudly. She hadn't heard him approach. I was watching her with an expression that was not pity. She was very certain of that, and not judgment. Something more neutral than either, like a question that genuinely didn't know its answer yet. She looked at him. He looked at her. Around them, the room did its thing. The music, the laughter, the phones. But between the two of them, something had gone quiet. Because peace, she said, is worth more than pride. She meant it. She had meant every word of the way she had conducted herself that entire evening. She was not performing dignity. She had actually chosen it, consciously, at each decision point, and she stood by every one of those choices. The man nodded. Once. Slowly. He didn't say anything else. He stepped aside, just slightly, to let her pass. And she walked the rest of the way to the elevator, pressed the button, and stepped in when the doors opened. She turned around, the way you do, to watch the room shrink as the doors closed. The man was still standing where she'd left him. He was looking at her. And then, with the slow deliberateness of someone who does things on his own timeline and no other, he reached up and began removing his left glove. The doors closed. The elevator descended. Imani rode down 42 floors in silence, one hand resting on her camera bag, looking at the brushed steel doors and the faint reflection of herself in them. She had no idea that behind those closed doors, in the lounge 42 floors above, the birthday music had just stopped. The music stopped the way power goes out in a storm. Not gradually, not with warning, just there and then, not there. A sudden absence that made the air in the room feel different. Nobody touched the DJ equipment. The turntables were still spinning. The laptop was still open. The playlist was still loaded. The man running the music had simply stepped away from the booth with the careful, unhurried movement of someone who had been told something in very few words and had understood all of them. Vanessa Harlow noticed first, not because she was particularly perceptive, but because she had been using the music as a backdrop for the video she was narrating live, holding her phone at the angle that made her cheekbones catch the amber light, talking over the beat about the evening, about the woman who had just left, about the look on her face when the champagne hit her bag. She had been mid-sentence when the silence came down and she stumbled over her own words, and the stumble irritated her, and she lowered the phone and looked toward the DJ booth. The man was gone. She looked around. The room had a different quality now. Not quieter exactly, because people were still talking, but the conversations had dropped in register, the way conversations do when people are uncertain and trying to hide it. She saw a few faces she didn't recognize near the service entrance, then a few more near the main entrance, then another pair standing beside the elevator bank, not talking to each other, not looking at their phones, just standing with the specific stillness of people who are very good at standing still. She pulled her boyfriend Marcus by the sleeve. He was mid-laugh at something one of their friends had said, and the pull annoyed him. What? Who are those people? He glanced in the direction she was looking, shrugged. Staff, probably. They're not in the hotel uniform. He looked again. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A very faint recalibration, quickly covered. I don't know, babe. Relax. She did not relax. Vanessa Harlow had grown up in rooms where the power dynamics were legible if you knew how to read them, and she had spent 28 years developing that literacy. Right now, the room was telling her something she didn't want to hear. She spotted the manager. Gerald. His name was Gerald. She knew his name because her family had been coming to this property for 11 years, and she made a point of knowing the names of people who could be useful, and she crossed to him with the stride of someone accustomed to immediate assistance. Gerald? Who authorized additional staff up here tonight? Gerald's face did something she had never seen it do before. It hesitated. Miss Harlow, It's a simple question. I've been informed that the lounge is being... He stopped, started again. There's a guest. A private guest. He's reserved the use of a guest reserved the lounge tonight during my event? A standing arrangement, Miss Harlow, pre-existing. I was only made aware. By whom? He looked at something over her shoulder. She turned. The man from the corner table was walking toward them. Not fast. Not like someone who was late or in a hurry. He walked the way a room walks toward you, like you are the fixed point and everything else is adjusting its position relative to yours. He had put his jacket back on. His gloves were gone. The tattoos that covered his hands ran up past his wrists and disappeared under his cuffs, and they were not decorative, not the kind of ink that people get at 22 to signal something about their personality. They were the kind that meant something specific, in a language Vanessa Harlow had never had reason to learn. He stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at Gerald first, and Gerald, who had worked hotel management for 26 years and prided himself on his composure, looked at the floor. Then the man looked at Vanessa. "Enjoy your evening," he said. His English was precise, slightly formal, with the particular cadence of someone who learned the language at a high level and uses it exactly as much as needed. Then he walked past her toward the far end of the room where 2 of the men she didn't recognize were waiting. Vanessa turned to watch him go. The back of his neck, the set of his shoulders, the fact that every person near the edges of the room seemed to have recalibrated their position slightly. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening, just a quiet geographic reorganization that left the birthday group standing in a space that suddenly felt more like a perimeter than a party. "Marcus," she said quietly. He was already beside her. He had seen it too. "It's fine," he said, but he didn't sound like himself. "Who is he?" "I don't know." "Call your father." He hesitated, which meant he was considering it, which meant he was more uncertain than he'd let on. Marcus Fenton did not call his father for small things. His father was the kind of man whose time was indexed in a way that made interruption expensive. If Marcus was weighing the call, he had seen something in the last 90 seconds that had shifted his calculation. He stepped away from her. She watched him press the phone to his ear. She watched his face while he waited for the connection. She watched the exact moment his father picked up. Marcus's posture changed, when a degree more formal, and then she watched her boyfriend's face as he described the man, gave his approximate age, mentioned the tattoos on the hands. Then she watched Marcus go very still. He said, "Yes, sir." Then, "Yes, sir." Then he hung up and stood there for a second with the phone still at his side. "Marcus." He turned around. His face had a quality she had seen before in other people, but never in him. The quality of someone who is working very hard to appear calm while the ground under them is doing something unexpected. "We should go," he said. "It's my birthday party." "Vanessa." "What did your father say?" "Marcus." "Look at me." "What did he say?" He looked at her. He lowered his voice to something barely above a breath. He said, "Don't speak to him. Don't film him. Don't do anything that draws his attention to you." "Why?" "Because we've already done something that drew his attention to us." Across the room, at the far end of the bar, Kang Min-jae stood with 2 of his men. They were not having a conversation that anyone observing them would have recognized as a conversation. There was no back and forth, no visible deliberation. One of the men spoke for approximately 15 seconds. Kang listened. He asked 2 questions, each of which required a single sentence to answer. Then he nodded once. One of his men left. The other stayed. The man who left took out his phone as he walked toward the service entrance. He made a call that lasted 11 seconds. By the time he pushed through the service door, things were already in motion that none of the people in the lounge were aware of. Things that involved servers in 3 different buildings, a network of contacts that stretched from the financial district to the Port Authority, and a series of very quiet conversations between people who owed Kang Min-jae the kind of debt that gets paid immediately and without complaint. Kang himself ordered nothing else from the bar. He stood with his remaining man, and he watched the room the way a physician watches a patient, not with urgency, but with the complete attention of someone who already knows what the diagnosis is and is simply waiting for the body to catch up to the information. He had recognized Marcus Fenton when the group first arrived. He had recognized 2 of the others as well. A woman named Chelsea Radner, whose family owned a commercial real estate portfolio that had twice been the subject of complaints from tenants. His charitable foundation had been quietly supporting, and a man named Brett Holloway, whose father sat on the board of a shipping company that had been moving things. It shouldn't have been moving through a port that Kang had been watching for 14 months. He had been in this lounge tonight for a different purpose entirely. A conversation with a business associate that had ended early. He had been waiting for his car, and then a woman in a wet jacket had walked in alone with a camera bag over her shoulder and sat down at the far end of the bar. And he had watched what happened next with the complete, unhurried attention he gave to everything that revealed who people were when they believed the room had already decided them. He had recognized her differently than he'd recognized the others. Not by name, not by family connection, by something less indexable than that. 4 months earlier, a community center in South Seattle had nearly collapsed financially due to an internal fraud case that had gone undetected for 2 years. The center ran after-school programs, a food distribution partnership, and a photography workshop that had been operating on a shoestring for a decade. Kang had been funneling support to the center through a charitable foundation registered under a name that had no visible connection to him. When the fraud case broke, the center went into crisis. A local photographer had shown up, volunteered her time, shot 3 weeks' worth of documentation, stayed late, came back on weekends, produced a body of work that told the story of what the center did and who it served with the kind of honesty that grant committees respond to. The center had secured emergency funding largely on the strength of that documentation. Kang's foundation director had sent him a 2-sentence note about it. The photographer's name was Imani Brooks. He had noted it the way he noted most things, filed, connected to other information, not acted upon. He was not a sentimental man. He did not collect good deeds the way other people collected social obligations. But he did pay attention, and what he paid attention to over time created a picture of the world that was more accurate than most people's. And in that picture, Imani Brooks occupied a specific and meaningful position. He had watched the champagne hit her camera bag, and he had watched what she did next. The cloth, the zip, the tip on the bar. And he had understood, in the precise way that he understood things, that he was watching someone who had decided who they were long before tonight, and was not going to be renegotiated by a room full of people who had never had to build anything from nothing. He had asked her one question. She had given him an answer that was true. Now she was 42 floors below him, and the work of the evening was beginning. Vanessa didn't leave. That was her first real mistake, though she would not understand it as a mistake until much later. Marcus had told her they should go. She had looked at the birthday balloons and the untouched cake and the group of 30 people who had come to celebrate her, and she had made the calculation that leaving would be a form of retreat she was not willing to perform. "Nobody is making us leave," she said. "Vanessa, this is my party. In a hotel my family has spent $200,000 in over the last decade. Nobody is making us leave." Marcus looked at her for a long moment with an expression that was not agreement. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went to get a drink, and Vanessa understood this as capitulation, which was another mistake. She went back to her friends. The energy of the group had changed. That was undeniable, even to people who hadn't clocked the specifics of what Marcus had said. The music was still off. Several guests who were not in the inner circle had quietly found reasons to drift toward the elevator. The ones who remained were the ones who had been closest to the harassment of Imani Brooks, who had filmed it, narrated it, encouraged it, organized it, which meant Vanessa was now standing in a room surrounded by exactly the people who were going to be most implicated by what was already happening beyond those walls. Chelsea Radner came over with 2 glasses of champagne, offered one to Vanessa. "Should we put the music back on?" "Where did the DJ go?" "I don't know, I thought he went to the bathroom." "He's been gone 20 minutes, Chelsea." Chelsea looked toward the booth, looked back at Vanessa. "I'm sure it's fine. Go ask Gerald to find someone." Chelsea went. She came back 3 minutes later without champagne and without Gerald. Her face had the particular blankness of someone who has just received information that their expression hasn't processed yet. "Gerald's not there," she said. "What do you mean he's not there?" "I mean he's not at the desk, he's not in the back. The person I talked to said he was—" She stopped. "She said he was in a meeting at 11:45 at night." "That's what she said." Vanessa looked toward the corner of the room. The man, Kang, was no longer standing where he'd been. She scanned the lounge. He was at a different position now, closer to the main entrance, talking to no one but facing the room with the patience of someone who had all the time available in the world. One of the men near the elevator caught her looking and met her eyes for exactly 1 second and then looked away. The second was long enough. She took out her phone. She opened the live stream that had been running since before Imani had arrived. 16,000 viewers. The comments were moving too fast to read individually, but she caught fragments, and what she caught stopped her breath for a half-second because the comments were not what they had been an hour ago. An hour ago, they had been her people, her followers, doing what they always did, amplifying and laughing and tagging friends. Now the comments were different. Now there were screenshots appearing in the comments, screenshots of things that had been posted earlier in the evening, her posts and her friends' posts, reshared and recontextualized by accounts she didn't recognize, with followings that dwarfed her own. The framing was different. The framing was, in fact, the opposite. She closed the app, opened it again. The viewer count was 31,000 and climbing. "Brett," she said. Brett Holloway looked up from his phone with the delayed focus of someone who had been drinking steadily since 9. "You need to look at this." He looked at her screen. He blinked. He looked again. Then he did something she had not seen Brett Holloway do in 7 years of friendship. He set his drink down on the nearest surface and took out his own phone with both hands. "Who's sharing this?" he said. "I don't know." This isn't right. These follower counts are..." He stopped scrolling. His thumb had found something. His face went the color of old wax. "Vanessa. Someone posted the full video." "I posted the video." "Not your edit, the full video. From the beginning. From when she walked in." He turned the screen toward her and she watched herself from an angle she didn't recognize, a fixed camera angle that wasn't anyone's phone, that covered the entire north section of the lounge with the steady, unshaking framing of a security camera. Walk toward Imani's seat with the champagne in her hand, the tilt of the glass, the ice cubes, the smile, all of it. All 40 minutes of it, from every angle, with audio so clear you could hear every word, in a video that was already sitting at 180,000 views and had been live for less than an hour. "Take it down," she said. "It's not mine to take down." "Then who?" "Brett, who uploaded this?" He looked at her. He looked at the man standing near the entrance. He looked back at Vanessa, and she watched him make a calculation she had never seen him make before. The calculation of someone who is weighing the cost of loyalty against the cost of association. "I think," he said, "I need to call my dad." He walked away from her without waiting for a response. Kong's phone received a message. He looked at it for 3 seconds, set it back in his pocket. The message was from one of his information directors, a woman who worked out of an office in Bellevue that was registered as a data consulting firm and was precisely that, depending on what you considered data and what you considered consulting. The message contained 4 names with brief annotations. He had already known most of what the annotations said, but the message confirmed that the documentation was complete and had been delivered to the relevant recipients in the past 40 minutes. One recipient was the senior partner at the law firm that managed the Harlow family's estate planning, who had received a summary of financial discrepancies in a trust connected to a property deal that had displaced 12 low-income families 18 months ago. Another was the editor of a Seattle business publication who had received time-stamped evidence connecting a board member of a Fenton-controlled LLC to a series of zoning decisions that had been purchased rather than earned. A third was the compliance officer at a financial institution that held accounts for 2 individuals currently present in the lounge, accounts which would be flagged for review beginning first thing in the morning. And the fourth message had gone to a federal investigator who had been building a case for 11 months and had been waiting for one specific piece of documentation to connect a series of shipping irregularities to the company name on Brett Holloway's father's letterhead. That documentation had arrived in his inbox at 11:52 p.m. on a Friday, which meant he was going to have a very productive weekend. Kong had not created any of this. He had not fabricated evidence, manufactured accusations, or invented misconduct. He had simply organized what already existed, what these families had already done, the trails they had already left, the corners they had already cut, and routed the information to the people who were positioned to act on it. This was important to him, not morally, in any abstract way, but practically. He had built his reputation on the precision of his information. You did not survive as long as he had survived, in the circles he moved in, by allowing room for the accusation that you had constructed something. The facts had to be facts. The evidence had to be evidence. Everything else was leverage, and leverage that could be discredited was worse than no leverage at all. The truth, deployed correctly, was the most durable weapon in existence. He had known this since he was 19 years old and sitting across a table from a man who was trying to destroy him with manufactured accusations, and realizing, in the specific clarifying way that real danger clarifies things, that the only defense that held was actual reality. He checked his watch. 11:57. His car would be downstairs in 8 minutes. He looked across the room one final time. Vanessa Harlow was standing in the center of her birthday party, with her phone in both hands and her face doing something he recognized. The specific expression of someone watching the architecture of their assumptions develop cracks. Around her, people were separating, finding individual crises to attend to, pulling out their own phones with the urgency of people who had stopped performing and started calculating. One woman was crying quietly near the window. Not from guilt, Kong judged, from fear. That was a distinction he always made. The man near the elevator, one of his, a young man named Chai Wan, who had been with Kong for 6 years, made the smallest gesture with his chin. Car's ready. Kong began walking toward the exit. He passed within 10 feet of Vanessa Harlow. She looked up from her phone and their eyes met for the second time that evening. The first time, outside the elevator, she had looked at him with the reflexive assessment of someone who categorizes people quickly and moves on. This time was different. This time she was looking at him with the specific, uncomfortable alertness of someone who has just realized they don't know how long they've been in the wrong room. She opened her mouth. "Wait," she said. He kept walking. "Wait, I want to talk to you. I want to..." He pushed through the door to the elevator lobby without stopping, without hurrying, and the door swung shut behind him and she was on the other side of it, and the birthday balloon shifted in the air, current the closing door created. And the mylar caught the amber light and threw small bright shapes across the ceiling. And nobody was filming any of it, because for the first time all evening, every phone in the room was being used. For the first time all evening, every phone in the room was being used for something other than filming someone else's humiliation. That shift, from performance to panic, happened in the space of about 90 seconds, and it moved through the birthday group, the way a cold front moves through a room when someone opens a window in winter. You felt it before you understood it. The air changed. The posture changed. The calculations behind every set of eyes changed. Vanessa stood at the door the man had walked through, and she did not push it open. She stood there with her hand an inch from the handle, and she did not push it, because something in the last 30 seconds had told her that pushing it would be a mistake she could not reverse. And Vanessa Harlow, whatever else she was, had excellent instincts for the location of lines she should not cross. The problem tonight was that she had already crossed several she hadn't seen. She turned back to the room. What she saw was the architecture of her social world disassembling itself in real time. Devon, who had been her closest friend since sophomore year at the University of Washington, who had been at every birthday, every launch party, every crisis, was standing near the window with his phone pressed to his ear and his back turned toward her. Not accidentally turned, deliberately turned, with the specific body language of someone who is having a conversation they don't want witnessed. Mia, who had been the one laughing loudest at the woman with the camera bag, who had personally reshared 3 clips to her own feed and added commentary, was now sitting on the velvet bench against the wall with both thumbs moving fast across her screen, her face pale and concentrated in the way of someone who is trying to delete something that has already been copied 10,000 times. Brett had not come back. Marcus was at the bar with a glass in his hand that he was not drinking from. He was staring at the surface of the bar with the expression of someone who is listening to a sound only they can hear. Vanessa walked to him. She did not walk fast. She refused to walk fast. She had spent 28 years learning to move through rooms in a way that communicated that she was exactly where she intended to be, and she was not going to surrender that in the next 30 seconds, regardless of what was happening to her heartbeat. She put her hand on Marcus's arm. He looked at her. His eyes were doing something she had never seen them do, a rapid, involuntary scanning, like he was searching the middle distance for an exit that wasn't marked. "Tell me," she said. My father called back. "And?" He set the glass down. He turned toward her and lowered his voice to something barely above the level of breath. "His name is Kong Min Jai. He runs..." My father described him as a network, a business network. But the way he said it, what kind of network? The kind that doesn't file public disclosures, Vanessa. She let that sit for a second. He's organized crime. My father said don't use that phrase. He said the distinction matters in ways we don't have the background to understand. Marcus, he said. Marcus stopped, pressed his lips together. He said that 3 years ago, a city councilman's son did something in a parking garage that ended the councilman's career, his son's freedom, and the family's ability to do business in this state. He said nobody could trace anything back to this man directly. He said that's not how it works. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Around them, the party was continuing to silently fracture. Devin still on the phone, Mia still deleting, other guests finding the slow gravitational pull of the elevator. So what do we do? She said. My father says we do nothing tonight. We go home. We don't talk to lawyers on the phone. We don't post anything. We don't reach out to anyone connected to what happened this evening. And tomorrow? He looked at her with the expression of someone who has just understood that tomorrow is a different country with a different set of rules. He's working on that. She nodded once. She picked up her own glass, which was still full, and she set it back down without drinking from it. Then she pulled out her phone and she looked at the video. The security camera video that was still sitting at 340,000 views, climbing. And she watched the tilt of the glass and the ice cubes and her own smile for 4 seconds before she closed the app. Tell your father to work faster, she said. 42 floors below, Amani Brooks was in her room. The suite was too large for one person. She always felt that about hotel suites, the way they seemed designed for a version of life that involved more people and more occasions than most people actually had. She had put her camera bag on the desk beside the window, unzipped it fully, and was going through the equipment with the methodical attention of someone who knew that panic about what might be damaged was more destructive than actual assessment. The bag had taken the champagne on the front pocket and the strap. The main compartment had sealed correctly. Her primary camera body was dry. The 35mm prime she'd been using all day was dry. The 2 extra batteries were fine, the memory cards were fine, the lens cloth in the front pocket was still damp. She set it on the radiator. She sat on the edge of the bed. The rain was still doing its thing against the window glass. The city below had the wet-lit look of a city at midnight, still moving, still lit, but with the specific quality of things winding down toward whatever came next. She thought about calling her sister in Atlanta. She thought about it for about 30 seconds and then decided against it. Because calling Maya right now would mean explaining the evening, and explaining the evening would mean reliving it in real time for someone who loved her and would therefore be angry on her behalf. And Amani did not have the bandwidth for managing someone else's anger about something she had already decided not to be angry about herself. She had not been wrong about any of the choices she'd made tonight. She was certain of that. The decision to stay. The decision not to confront. The decision to leave on her own terms. The decision to answer the question that the man in the gloves had asked her. She thought about the question. Are you leaving because you want to, or because they decided you should? She thought about the fact that he had asked it quietly, privately, without an audience, as though the answer actually mattered to him and not as material for another set of cameras. She thought about the way he had stepped aside to let her pass without touching her, without performing the gesture. She pulled off her jacket. She hung it on the back of the desk chair. She opened her laptop and started backing up the day's photos to the external drive she always carried, because the habit of backing up before anything else was so deeply embedded at this point that she would have done it in the middle of an earthquake. She did not know what was happening 42 floors above her. She did not know about the video. She did not know about the 340,000 views. She did not know that her face, patient, controlled, absorbing each piece of cruelty with the particular composure of someone who has too much self-respect to perform their own pain, was being watched by strangers on 6 continents who were reacting to it with the specific outrage of people who recognize something true. She backed up her photos. She ordered room service, a club sandwich she'd been too tired to eat earlier. She took a shower that lasted too long and was not apologetic about it. She did not know that while she was in the shower, her phone was accumulating notifications at a rate it had never accumulated them before. The lounge at 12:43 a.m. had the quality of a room after a verdict. Most of the birthday guests were gone. The velvet rope was still strung between the 2 plants, but the balloons on one side had begun to drift, anchors losing their hold, and two of them were slowly migrating toward the ceiling in a way that felt vaguely like something departing. The cake had been cut by no one. The DJ equipment was still there. The DJ was not. Vanessa was in a chair at the center of what remained of her party, which was now 4 people: Marcus, Devin, who had finally ended his call and returned with the expression of a man who had received news he did not want to translate; Chelsea, who had been silently crying for 20 minutes in the way that people cry when they are crying about consequences rather than guilt; and a man named Theo Radner, Chelsea's older brother, who had arrived 20 minutes ago from somewhere else in the building and was the only person in the room who was not showing fear. Theo was 34, broader than Marcus, and had the specific stillness of someone who had been in actual physical danger before and had survived it, and had taken from that experience not caution, but a kind of aggressive contempt for situations that hadn't yet escalated to his threshold. He was the wrong person to have in this room tonight, and Vanessa knew it, but he was the person who was there. "This is solvable," he said. Not for the first time. He had been saying it in various formations since he arrived. "Theo, everything is solvable when you have the right resources applied to it. What we need to do is find out what evidence he actually has versus what he's representing that he has. And then He has the security footage," Marcus said. "He posted the security footage. He already used it. So it's already out there, which means the damage from that specific piece is already done, and the question becomes damage control, not prevention." "Theo, you're not listening." Devin's voice had the flat, careful quality of someone who is trying to be precise under pressure. "The footage is one piece. What Marcus is telling you is that this man has access to information that goes beyond tonight. That the video was almost..." He paused. "It was almost incidental." Theo looked at him. "What does that mean?" Devin looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Vanessa. She was the one who said it. "Brett's father got a call tonight from someone at the Port Authority about irregularities in a shipping manifest going back 14 months. Theo stared at her. "That's a federal matter." "Yes." "That has nothing to do with tonight. Except that the call came tonight, after..." She gestured at the room, at the balloons, at the absence of everything that had been here 4 hours ago. All of this. "Brett's not answering his phone. His father's attorney is apparently on a plane from Portland right now." Theo was quiet for 4 seconds. Vanessa counted them. "What else?" he said. "My father's estate attorney received documentation tonight about the Lakeview property deal, the one from 18 months ago. He called me at midnight." "Your father's attorney called you at midnight." "Apparently the documentation was delivered in a way that made it feel urgent." "What kind of documentation?" "He wouldn't say on the phone. He said we need to meet first thing in the morning and that I should not make any statements, public or private, between now and then." Theo sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment with his jaw working. Then he looked back at her. "How much does this man actually know? How is that even—" "I don't know," she said. "Nobody builds this kind of file overnight." "No," Marcus said quietly. "They don't." The implication of that settled over the group like weather. If the documentation hadn't been built tonight, if it had been accumulated over time, organized and waiting, then tonight had not been a trigger. Tonight had been a delivery date. The materials had been ready before any of them walked into this lounge. Whatever this man was, he had not responded to the evening's events by scrambling to build a case. He had walked in with one already assembled and had been waiting for a reason to use it. "Then why now?" Chelsea said. She had stopped crying. Her voice was the specific flat tone of someone who has moved through fear into something colder. "If he had all of this before, why tonight? Why us?" Nobody answered immediately. Vanessa looked at the spot on the carpet near the bar where the champagne had spread when she'd tipped the glass. It was still there. A darker patch in the pattern, not large, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. "Because of her," she said. Marcus's father arrived at 1:15 a.m. Richard Fenton was 61 years old, and he had the build of someone who had been larger once, wide shoulders carrying a softness they hadn't carried at 40. And he had the face of someone who had spent decades developing the capacity to enter rooms without announcing what he was feeling. He arrived without calling ahead, which meant he had been in transit before Marcus had finished the second phone call, which meant the first call had been enough. He came in through the lobby exit that the hotel staff had left accessible, which told Vanessa something about the kind of relationship the Fenton family had with this property, which under different circumstances would have been reassuring. He looked at his son first, then he looked at the room, then he looked at Vanessa with an expression that was not angry, which was somehow worse than angry, because anger she could work with. "Everyone who isn't family," he said, "needs to leave." Devon left without argument, which surprised her. Chelsea looked at her brother. Theo looked at Richard Fenton for a moment with the measuring expression he used on everyone, and Richard Fenton looked back at him with the patient, complete stillness of someone who has been assessed by more consequential people and has never found the experience particularly interesting. Theo stood up and left, and Chelsea followed him. Richard Fenton sat down in the chair Theo had vacated. He put both hands on the table in front of him, large hands, the hands of someone who had worked physically before the money accumulated, which Vanessa had always found vaguely important to his identity. And he looked at her and Marcus. "You need to understand something," he said. "And I need you to understand it without asking follow-up questions, because we don't have time for the back and forth tonight." Neither of them spoke. Kang Min Jae is not someone you negotiate with. He is not someone you threaten. He is not someone you retain counsel against and file injunctions against and hope that the legal process creates enough friction to matter. That is not how his world functions. "Then how does it function?" Marcus said. His father looked at him. "You already got what you're getting from him. What happened tonight? The footage, the calls, the documentation. That is the response. That is it. He does not escalate beyond what the situation calls for, and he does not back down from what he has decided the situation calls for. Those two things together mean that what you are experiencing right now is the ceiling and the floor simultaneously. The shipping documentation is a separate matter. If Holloway's family has exposure there, that's their problem to manage, and they will manage it without reference to tonight, publicly." He paused. "The documentation your attorney received about the Lakeview deal is real. I know that without seeing it because I know what was done on that deal, and I know that it was done sloppily." Vanessa felt something shift in her chest. "You knew about the Lakeview irregularities. I knew there were corners cut. That's not—" She stopped. "How bad is it?" He looked at her for a moment that lasted too long. "Manageable, if it's managed correctly. By which I mean transparently, proactively, and without any additional attention from anyone who might want to make an example of it." He already sent it to the attorney. "Yes, which means the window for proactive is narrowing very fast." Marcus leaned forward. "Dad, can you reach him? Is there a channel, a contact, someone who—" "No. Someone must have a—" "Marcus." The word landed flat and final. "I have spent my career being careful about exactly this kind of line. I'm not going to cross it at 1 in the morning in a hotel lounge because your girlfriend tipped champagne on a photographer." The word girlfriend landed on Vanessa with a precision that Richard Fenton may or may not have intended. She looked at Marcus. He was looking at the table. "So what do we do?" she said. "Tonight? Nothing." He stood up. "Tomorrow, you retain counsel, personal counsel, separate from the family firm. And you tell them everything that happened in this room this evening, in sequence, without editorializing. You do not post. You do not speak to journalists. You do not attempt to contact anyone who was in this room tonight. And the video?" He looked at her with something that was close to pity, but wasn't quite. "The video is not a problem you solve. The video is a fact you adjust to." He buttoned his jacket. He looked at his son once more, a long look that carried too much for the situation to hold, and then he walked back out through the lobby exit, and the door settled shut behind him. And Vanessa and Marcus were alone in the wreckage of her birthday party, with the untouched cake and the drifting balloons and the darker patch on the carpet near the bar. Marcus didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then, "I'm going to the room." "Marcus," he stood up. "Marcus, don't—" "I need to not be in this room right now, Vanessa." His voice was not raised. That was somehow the worst part. "I need to be somewhere that isn't this room." He left. She sat alone at the table. The last of the ambient light from the city threw slow shapes across the carpet. The untouched champagne in her glass had gone warm. The mylar balloons that spelled out her name moved in an air current from somewhere, the letters rearranging their order slightly, losing their alignment. She picked up her phone. She opened the video again. 847,000 views. She watched herself smile as the ice hit the leather. She watched the woman, Imani. Her name was apparently Imani. Vanessa had read it in the comments. Do the thing with the cloth. The careful, deliberate, quiet thing with the cloth. The zip. The tip on the bar. The nod to the man in the brown jacket who had returned the stool. She watched it twice. The third time she watched it, she was not watching herself. She was watching the woman. Watching the specific quality of what the woman did with her face when nobody was performing for her. Not for the cameras. Not for the room. Not for anyone. Just the private face of someone who has made a decision about who they are and is holding to it under conditions designed to make that decision impossible. Vanessa set the phone down. She sat in the silence of the room for a long time. The silence of a room after a party is a specific kind of silence, heavier than ordinary silence, furnished with the evidence of what had been here and was now gone. The glasses, the napkins, the ribbon from the velvet rope that someone had unknotted and left on the floor. She thought about the documentation her attorney had received. She thought about the Lakeview families, 12 of them, she knew, she had always known, though she had chosen to know it in the particular abstracted way that people know the consequences of decisions when those consequences belong to other people. Families who had been displaced by a deal that had been structured to avoid scrutiny and had succeeded in avoiding it right up until tonight. She thought about her father. She thought about whether he had known, and in the same second she thought it, she understood that she already knew the answer. She picked up her phone again. Not to look at the video. She opened her contacts, scrolled to a name. She put the phone down without calling. She picked it up again. She had built her public identity on a very specific architecture. The right schools, the right events, the right causes, the careful curation of an image that was both aspirational and accessible, luxury delivered with enough warmth that it didn't read as contempt for the people watching. She had been good at it. She had been genuinely good at it for years. She thought about what Richard Fenton had said. The video is not a problem you solve, it's a fact you adjust to. And she thought about how many other things in her life, on close examination, might be facts she had been avoiding adjusting to. She sat with that thought in the empty lounge at 2 a.m. while the city went about its business 42 floors below. And the longer she sat with it, the heavier it became. And the heavier it became, the more clearly she understood that the woman she had been when she walked into this room tonight was not going to be sufficient for whatever came next. That the version of herself she had been maintaining with such careful, expensive public effort was going to have to be rebuilt from a foundation she had not yet located and was not certain she possessed. And that the rebuilding, if it happened at all, was going to have to start with something she had not used in a very long time, which was the truth. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, in the empty lounge at 2 a.m. with the city humming 42 floors below and the untouched cake going stale on the table, Vanessa Harlow sat alone and felt, for the first time in years, the specific and unfamiliar weight of a room that had stopped performing for her. The video hit 2 million views at 6:47 a.m. Imani found out the way she found out about most things that happened while she was asleep. Her phone, face down on the nightstand, had been vibrating with the irregular rhythm of something that wasn't an alarm, and when she picked it up and looked at the screen, she saw a number of notifications that her brain refused to process correctly on the first pass because the number was wrong. The kind of wrong that makes you set the phone down and pick it up again to confirm you read it correctly. She read it correctly. She sat up in the hotel bed. The room was gray with early morning light filtered through the curtains she had not fully closed. The club sandwich from last night was still on the desk, half eaten, the plate pushed to the side. Her camera bag was where she'd left it. The lens cloth on the radiator had dried overnight. She scrolled. She found the video 11 notifications in, a direct message from someone she didn't know, an account with a blue check and a following she couldn't have bought with a year's salary, containing a link and 3 words, "You need to see this." She watched it. She watched it for 40 seconds before she had to set the phone down on the bed and just sit with her hands in her lap and breathe for a moment. Because the video was her. But it was also not the version of her she had been living inside last night. Last night she had been inside her own experience, the weight of the bag strap, the cold of the champagne, the specific effort of controlling her face, and from inside that experience, it had felt mostly like endurance, like getting through something, like the private, unglamorous work of maintaining dignity under conditions designed to erode it. From the outside, on a fixed camera with clean audio, it looked like something else. It looked like a woman who was completely, quietly unbreakable. She watched the part where she asked the bartender for the cloth. She watched herself wipe down the strap. She watched the way she tipped on the bar. She hadn't thought about the tip in the moment as a statement. It had just been what you did. You tipped the person who helped you. And she could see now from outside herself how it landed in the room. The tip in the middle of the humiliation. The nod to the man in the brown jacket. She watched herself walk toward the elevator, and she watched herself stop when the man asked his question, and she watched, for the first time, what she had looked like when she answered it. Because peace is worth more than pride. She had said it quietly. She had not said it for the room. She had said it to him privately, and it was in the video anyway, audio clean. And whoever had watched it had apparently found something in it that made them share it 2 million times. She put the phone face down on the bed again. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs. She looked at the curtains. She was a travel photographer from Atlanta who ran Saturday morning classes for teenagers and had a website with 4,000 followers and a camera bag that smelled like last night's champagne. She was not prepared for 2 million. Her phone started ringing. An Atlanta number. Maya. She picked up. Imani. Her sister's voice had the specific texture of someone who has been awake for a while and has been deciding whether to call. Are you okay? I'm fine. I've been watching this thing for 2 hours. I've been sitting here watching people share this, and I didn't know if I should call, because I didn't know if you even knew. I just found out. Are you okay? You already asked me that. Because you didn't actually answer it. Imani looked at the ceiling. The water stain in the corner that she'd noticed last night was shaped roughly like the state of Michigan. I'm okay. I'm in a hotel in Seattle, and I'm okay. Do you want me to come? No, Maya. I have a shoot this afternoon. Imani, there are 2 million. I know. And it's still climbing. It went up 200,000 while I've been on this call. I know. A pause. What are you going to do? She thought about it. The actual answer, not the performed one. I'm going to eat the rest of my club sandwich, she said, and then I'm going to take my camera and do the job I came here to do. Maya was quiet for a second. Then she laughed. One short, real laugh. You are so deeply, profoundly you. Was that a compliment? Yeah, actually, it was. They stayed on the phone for another 4 minutes without talking about the video. Maya told her about a problem with her neighbor's dog. Imani told her about the waterfront shots from yesterday afternoon. Then Maya said she needed to get the kids to school, and Imani said, okay, and they hung up, and the room was quiet again. Imani sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the half-eaten sandwich. She was not going to pretend the video didn't exist. She was not going to pretend she felt nothing about it. What she felt was complicated in the specific way that things are complicated when something true gets amplified in ways you didn't choose. Simultaneously validating and violating, seen and exposed at the same time. She had not asked to be a symbol of anything. She had just been a person having a bad night in a hotel bar. But the bad night had already happened, and the video was already real, and 2 million people had already seen her face doing the thing her face did when she was working very hard not to let the room win. She picked up the sandwich. She ate it cold, standing at the window, looking at a Seattle morning that had cleared overnight and was now the specific pale gold blue of a Pacific Northwest day that has decided to be beautiful despite the previous evening's evidence to the contrary. She did not know about Kang Min-jae. She did not know what had happened in the lounge after the elevator doors closed. She did not know about the documentation, the frozen accounts, the attorney on a plane from Portland, the federal investigator who had spent his Friday night reading 14 months of shipping records. She knew about the cloth and the strap and the tip on the bar and the question a stranger had asked her in a quiet voice that turned out to have been picked up by a microphone she hadn't known was there. She finished the sandwich. She picked up her camera. Vanessa's attorney called at 8:03 a.m. She had not slept. She had gone to the room at 3 a.m. and lain in the dark next to Marcus, who was either asleep or performing sleep with considerable conviction, and she had watched the ceiling for 4 hours doing the math that she had been avoiding doing for most of her adult life. The math of what she actually had versus what she had been presenting herself as having. The math of which parts of her life were built on something solid, and which parts were built on the assumption that scrutiny would never arrive. The attorney's name was Patricia Weng. Vanessa had retained her 2 years ago for a contract dispute that had never materialized into anything. She had liked Patricia's directness and filed her away for future use. This was apparently future use. Patricia's voice on the phone was the voice of someone who had been in her office since 7 and had read everything twice. "I've reviewed what was forwarded to your estate attorney. I need you to tell me about the Lakeview acquisition in your own words before I say anything else." "My father managed that deal. Your name is on 3 of the LLCs. I signed what he told me to sign." "Vanessa." A pause with texture in it. "I need you to understand that 'I signed what my father told me to sign' is a position, not a defense. It can function as a mitigating factor. It is not an exit." She sat up on the edge of the bed. Marcus was definitely awake. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, the specific non-breathing of someone who is listening. "What's the exposure?" "That depends on questions I can't answer yet. What I can tell you is that the documentation that was delivered last night is organized in a way that suggests the person who assembled it understands the regulatory framework very specifically. They didn't just collect information, they organized it in the sequence that an investigator would find most useful." "As a roadmap," Vanessa said. "As a roadmap," Patricia confirmed, "which means it was prepared by someone with either legal training or extensive experience working adjacent to law enforcement, or both." Vanessa looked at the window. The morning light was coming through the gap in the curtains. "Can we get ahead of it?" "That's what I want to discuss, but I need the full picture from you first. Not the managed version, the actual picture." She looked at Marcus. He was lying on his back looking at the ceiling. He had heard every word. "Marcus needs to leave the room," she said. He got up without argument. She heard the bathroom door close. She took a breath, and she started talking. Across town, in an office building in Bellevue that had no signage visible from the street, Kang Min-jae arrived at 8:30 a.m. and spent the first 40 minutes reading reports. His office was not designed to impress. It was a room with a desk, a window that looked at another building's wall, 2 chairs for visitors, and 3 screens arranged in an arc that he had configured himself years ago and had never updated because they functioned correctly, and function was sufficient. His coffee was black and came from a machine in the hallway that he had also never updated for the same reason. His director of operations, a woman named Song Yu, who had worked with him for 9 years and communicated in the precise, compressed language of someone who knows that accuracy matters more than volume, stood at the corner of the desk and walked him through the night's activity. The Holloway matter had been received. The federal investigator had filed an internal memo at 2 a.m. flagging the documentation for priority review. That process was out of Kang's hands now, which was where it was meant to be. The Harlow estate documentation had been received by the attorney and had been passed, as of 40 minutes ago, to a compliance review process within the firm. Patricia Wang had been retained by the daughter, which Song Yu flagged as a positive indicator. Wang was ethical and would push her client toward transparency rather than obstruction, which meant the process was more likely to result in actual accountability. The Fenton family's position was more complicated. Richard Fenton had spent 30 years building relationships on both sides of various lines in ways that made his exposure diffuse and difficult to locate precisely. Kang had known this when he assembled the materials and had calibrated accordingly. What had been delivered was sufficient to apply pressure and create accountability without being sufficient to invite the kind of blowback that came from targeting someone with Richard Fenton's depth of institutional connection. There was a difference between justice and war, and Kang had never confused the two. "The video?" he said. 2.3 million as of 20 minutes ago. The primary repost accounts are lifestyle and social justice aligned, predominantly female audiences, predominantly 35 and over. Sentiment is strongly positive toward the subject. The original group's channels? Harlow's account lost 40,000 followers overnight. Radner is down 62,000. The others are smaller losses but consistent direction. He nodded. This was not the outcome he had designed for. It was the outcome that had resulted from the design, which was a distinction that mattered to him. He had not orchestrated the video's spread. He had placed it in a position to be found. What people did with what they found was their own expression. "The camera," he said. Song set a case on the desk. It was a padded transit case, black, the kind used for professional equipment. Recovered from the dance floor, no damage to the body. One filter ring on the secondary lens was bent, replaced. He looked at the case without opening it. She's doing a shoot this afternoon, Song-Yu said. Waterfront, based on her assignment booking. We have the contact for the building management if you want to. No, she stopped. Not today, he said. She has work to do. Vanessa's second call of the morning was from her father. She had been expecting it. She had been expecting it the way you expect weather that the sky has been promising for hours. Not with surprise, but with a specific settling dread. She let it ring twice before she answered, not because she needed the time, but because she refused, even now, to perform eagerness for him. I spoke with Gerald at the hotel, he said. He skipped hello. He always skipped hello. He tells me the documentation was hand-delivered to 3 different parties simultaneously. That level of coordination doesn't happen reactively. I know. It was prepared, which means we were being watched before last night. I know that too. A pause. Her father had a particular quality to his silences. They were not empty. They were occupied with calculation, and you could feel the calculation happening the way you could feel a presence in a dark room. How much did Patricia tell you? Enough. Vanessa, I need to know exactly what... Dad. She stopped. She had not planned to say what she said next. It arrived in her mouth fully formed, like something that had been waiting for the right pressure to release it. I need to know about the Lakeview families. The silence this time was different. That's not the 12 families, the ones displaced by the acquisition. I need to know what happened to them. That's a separate conversation for a separate... No. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. It's the same conversation. It was always the same conversation, and we just never had it. He was quiet for 7 seconds. She counted. They were relocated, he said. Where? There were relocation packages. Where did they go, Dad? Another pause. I don't have that information in front of me. Then get it in front of you. She stood up from the edge of the bed. The room felt different standing than sitting, bigger, more navigable. Get it in front of you and get it to Patricia, and then we're going to talk about what we do next. Not what the attorneys advise. What we actually do. Vanessa, this is not the time to make emotional. I watched a woman clean champagne off her camera bag with a hotel cloth, she said, while 40 people filmed it and laughed. And then I watched 2 million other people watch her do it and feel something about it. And I understand now that the difference between those two groups is not about what they saw. It's about whether they had decided in advance who mattered. She could hear him breathing. I've had that conversation, she said, with myself this morning for about 4 hours. He said nothing. Get me the information about the families, she said. I'll be home by noon. She hung up before he responded. She set the phone down on the nightstand. She looked at the curtains, now fully lit with morning, and she pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed twice, deliberately, the way you breathe when you are deciding something from which there is no return. The confrontation happened at 11:20 a.m. in the hotel lobby. Vanessa had not planned it. She had come downstairs with her bag, intending to check out and take the car service her father's office had arranged. She was in the elevator, watching the floor numbers descend, running through the sequence of the morning's conversations and the calls she still needed to make and the version of herself she was trying to assemble from the available materials, when the elevator stopped at the 4th floor and the doors opened. Theo Radner got on. He looked like he had not slept either, but differently. Not hollowed the way Vanessa felt hollowed, but charged, running on something that wasn't rest but was performing some of the same functions. His jaw was set. His eyes had the quality she had always found slightly unnerving, the quality of someone who has decided that aggression is a tool set and is currently selecting from it. He looked at her. I'm going to find him, he said. No preamble. She looked at him. Theo, I have a guy who does background work, real background work, not Google. He's going to find out where this man operates, how he's structured, who he owes. Stop. Up. There's always pressure points. Everybody has... Theo. She turned to face him fully. The elevator was still descending. Listen to me. What you're describing is the reason we're in this situation. He stared at her. What? Deciding that the answer to a problem is to find the pressure point and push it. That's... She stopped, reached for the words that had been assembling themselves over the last 4 hours. That's what we did to her. We saw someone and we decided she was a pressure point, something we could push for entertainment. And now you want to do the exact same thing to the man who noticed. That's not the same. It is exactly the same, Theo. It is the same logic applied to a different target. He looked at her with something shifting behind his expression. Not agreement, not yet, maybe not ever, but a crack in the certainty. So what? We just take it? We just sit with it? We just sit with the fact that we did something wrong, she said, and figure out what that means, without looking for a pressure point to make it someone else's problem. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Vanessa picked up her bag. Chelsea's not going to see it that way, he said. I know. My father is already talking to... I know. She stepped out of the elevator. She stopped and looked back at him. Tell Chelsea what I said. She'll do what she wants with it. That's all any of us can do. She walked across the lobby toward the exit. The morning doorman held the door. The Seattle air came in, cool and clear after the rain, carrying the smell of salt water from the direction of the bay. She stopped on the sidewalk. She was not the same person who had walked into this hotel 36 hours ago. She could feel the difference, the way you feel the difference in your legs after a long descent. Not pain exactly, but the knowledge that something has been worked that hasn't been worked before, and it was going to need time before it felt like anything other than evidence of effort. Her phone buzzed. Patricia Wang. She answered it. I've made contact, Patricia said, with the parties who received the documentation. There's a path toward a managed process. It won't be clean. It will involve disclosure that your family will find uncomfortable. But it's a path. Take it, Vanessa said. A pause. Your father isn't going to agree without a fight. My father, she said, is going to have to manage his own situation. I'm managing mine. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked at the street. A cab moved through the intersection. A woman walked a dog with the specific, purposeful gait of someone who had somewhere to be. Across the street, a man was photographing the corner building from 3 different angles, adjusting between shots, moving with the focused, unhurried attention of someone doing work they understood. She watched him for a moment. Then she got in the car and she went home. Imani was at the waterfront by noon. The morning had delivered the kind of light that professional photographers build their schedules around. Low and gold, and coming from the right angle off the water to turn ordinary things luminous. She had found a position near the ferry terminal where the foot traffic was good, and the background had the layered quality she'd been looking for. The water, the Olympic mountains in the distance with their snow caps still holding, the activity of the market above the hill. She had been shooting for 90 minutes, and her shoulder was fine, and her camera was doing exactly what it was designed to do, and she had not thought about the video for 45 consecutive minutes, which felt like an achievement. What she thought about instead was the work. The specific, available, real work of seeing a thing and deciding to record it. The man at the fish stall who had been doing this job for 30 years and whose hands showed it. The tourist couple who had the particular choreography of 2 people who have been together long enough to move around each other without looking. The girl, maybe 10 years old, who had climbed onto a piling and was looking at the water with the complete unselfconscious focus of someone who has not yet learned to perform their interior life for an audience. She photographed the girl. She photographed the way the girl's jacket moved in the wind off the water. She photographed the moment the girl turned and saw her photographing and did not perform for the camera. Just looked at it, curious and open, the way children look at things before they've been taught that being seen is something you need to manage. She lowered the camera. She smiled at the girl. The girl smiled back. Then the girl's mother called her name from somewhere up the hill, and she jumped down from the piling and ran, and Imani watched her go and thought about the teenagers in her Saturday class who had started the year afraid of the camera and had ended it afraid of what happened when they put it down. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize, Seattle area code. She almost didn't answer. She was in the middle of something and the number was unknown, and the morning had already been complicated enough. She answered. Ms. Brooks, a woman's voice, precise and warm in a ratio that suggested professional practice. My name is Song Yu. I work with a private organization that supports arts education initiatives in the Pacific Northwest. I apologize for the direct contact. I was given your number by the director of the South Seattle Community Center. Imani lowered the camera fully. Okay. We've been aware of your work with the center's photography program for several months. We have a grant opportunity that I believe you may be uniquely suited for. I'd like to schedule a time to discuss it, if you're available during your time in Seattle." She looked at the water. The ferry was coming in across the Sound, leaving a white line in the blue. "What kind of grant?" she said. "The kind that would allow you to build the program you've been running on borrowed resources into something permanent," Song-Yu said. "With funding for equipment, space, and instructor salaries for a minimum of 3 years." Imani was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Brooks?" "I'm here," she said. Yes, I'm available." "Wonderful. Would Thursday work?" "Thursday works." She hung up. She stood on the waterfront with the ferry coming in and the girl gone, and the gold light still doing its work on the ordinary things around her, and she held the camera at her side and felt the weight of it. The specific, familiar, reliable weight of something that had been with her through years of mornings like this one and mornings nothing like this one. She lifted it. She found the ferry in the frame. She waited for the angle to be right. She took the shot. She did not know who Song-Yu worked for. She did not know about the conversation in the Bellevue office, or the case on the desk, or the decision that had been made at 8:30 in the morning by a man in a room with no signage that her work was worth protecting in the way that things worth protecting deserve to be protected. She just knew the light was right, and the ferry was moving, and there was work left to do before the afternoon was. There was work left to do before the afternoon was gone, and she did it. She stayed at the waterfront until the gold light flattened into the softer, more democratic light of mid-afternoon, and then she walked back through the market and shot for another 40 minutes among the flower stalls and the fish vendors, and the tourists, and the people who were not tourists, but who the tourists walked past without seeing. She photographed those people most carefully. The woman at the edge of the market selling handmade cards from a folding table, who had been there every day for 11 years, according to the man at the adjacent stall. The older gentleman sitting on a bench with a coffee cup in both hands, watching the street with the particular attention of someone who has nowhere to be and has made peace with that. The boy, maybe 14, practicing skateboard tricks in the same 10-foot section of pavement over and over, falling the same way each time, getting up the same way each time, which was immediately. She photographed the boy getting up, not the fall, the getting up. She walked back to the hotel at 3 in the afternoon and sat at the desk and went through the day's work with the methodical pleasure she always felt at this part. The sorting, the culling, the moment when certain images declared themselves as keepers and others revealed themselves as the necessary practice that led to the keepers. She had 42 images she wanted. She had 7 that she thought were genuinely good. She had 2 that she thought might be something more than that. The ferry shot was one of them. The boy getting up was the other. She backed everything up. She made a cup of tea from the hotel's inadequate electric kettle, using the bag she always carried in her camera bag because hotel tea was never sufficient. She sat in the chair by the window and drank it and looked at the Seattle afternoon and thought about the phone call from Song-Yu with the same careful, non-committal attention she gave to things that seemed good before she understood them fully. 3 years of funding, equipment, space, instructor salaries. She had been running the Saturday program out of a borrowed church basement for 4 years, on a budget assembled from small grants, her own income, and the rotating generosity of people who believed in it. She had 17 kids currently enrolled. She had turned away 9 in the last intake because she had no space and no equipment for more. She thought about what 3 years would mean. She thought about it practically, not emotionally. Square footage, camera bodies, the editing software the kids needed, and she currently couldn't afford, the possibility of a second instructor so the program could run on Saturdays and Sundays both. She thought about the South Seattle Community Center and the documentation she had shot there, and the fraud case that had threatened to take it down. She thought about the fact that something she had done for free, because it needed doing, had apparently reached the attention of a foundation she had never heard of in a way she hadn't anticipated. She finished her tea. She opened her laptop. She searched the name Song-Yu in connection with Pacific Northwest Arts Foundations and found a sparse professional profile connected to a consulting firm in Bellevue with a minimal web presence. She found a single mention in a community center's annual report from 2 years ago, a note of thanks to an unnamed foundation administered through the consulting firm. The trail ended there. She sat with that for a moment. Then she closed the laptop, because some things had to be allowed to develop at their own pace, and the forcing of them accomplished nothing except the loss of the possibility they carried. She had a Thursday meeting. She would go to the Thursday meeting. She would listen to what Song Yu said, and she would ask the questions that mattered, and she would make her decision from there. That was enough for today. The Thursday meeting happened in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Bellevue building that, as Imani had noted from the street, had no visible signage. Song Yu was exactly what her voice had suggested: precise, warm, competent, in the specific way of someone who has been doing meaningful work for a long time and has stopped needing recognition for it. She was perhaps 35, dressed in a way that was professional without performance, and she had a folder on the table that contained a grant proposal already drafted, which meant the meeting was not exploratory. The decision had already been made somewhere above this conference room. The meeting was for Imani's benefit. Imani read the proposal. She read it twice, slowly, because the habit of reading things slowly before responding was one she had developed in her 20s after a grant experience that had taught her the specific cost of agreeing to terms before you understood them. The terms were clean, unusually clean. 3 years, renewable. Equipment budget that made her breath catch slightly on the first pass. Space allowance sufficient for a dedicated studio. 2 instructor salaries at rates that would allow those instructors to actually live. A governance structure that kept full programmatic control with Imani, requiring only annual reporting to the foundation. No branding requirements, no naming rights, no public acknowledgement required. She set the proposal down. "Who funds this foundation?" she said. Song Yu's expression didn't change. "Private donors who prefer to remain anonymous." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I'm authorized to give." Imani looked at her. Song Yu looked back. Patient, direct, not defensive. The look of someone who is telling the truth within the constraints they've been given and is not ashamed of either the truth or the constraints. "The community center," Imani said, "the fraud case. You were involved in what happened there." "The foundation was involved in supporting the center's recovery, yes. And the photography documentation I did. That reached you. It reached the people who needed to see it." Imani was quiet for a moment. Outside the conference room window, Bellevue spread in the middle distance. Orderly, prosperous. Not quite Seattle, with the specific quality of a city that has been deliberately planned. "I was in a hotel rooftop lounge last Friday night," she said, "in Seattle." "I know," Song Yu said. "There was a man there, a Korean man, mid-40s. He asked me a question before I got in the elevator." Song Yu said nothing. "Is this connected to him?" Song Yu put both hands flat on the table, a gesture that Imani somehow recognized as deliberate, as a physical form of transparency. "What I can tell you is that the Foundation's interest in your work predates last Friday evening by several months, and that the grant being offered to you is based entirely on the merit of that work and on what it has done for the community it serves." "That's not a no," Imani said. "No," Song Yu agreed. "It's not." They looked at each other across the table. Imani thought about the question in the elevator lobby. "Are you leaving because you want to, or because they decided you should?" She thought about the answer she had given and what it had cost her to mean it. "If I take this," she said, "I need to know that the program's independence is real, that nobody is going to use it to put their name on something or tell me what stories the kids should be telling. I can put that in writing in terms more explicit than what's already in the proposal. I want it in writing. Done. And I want to know who I'm ultimately accountable to, not the name. I understand you can't give me the name, but I want to understand the structure. Who makes the decision if this ever becomes a conflict?" Song Yu opened the folder. She produced a 1-page organizational chart and slid it across the table. Imani looked at it. The foundation sat above the consulting firm. Above the foundation was a numbered trust registered in the state of Washington. At the top of the trust was a single line: independent trustee, sole discretion. "And if the trustee and I disagree about the program's direction?" "The program's direction is yours. The trustee's discretion covers continuation of funding only, and only in the event of documented ethical violations." "Define ethical violations." "The proposal defines them on page 7. Imani turned to page 7. She read the definition. It was reasonable, more than reasonable. It was written by someone who understood what ethical violations actually were, which was a narrower category than most funding agreements acknowledged. She set the page down. She looked at Song Yu. "Give me a pen," she said. 6 weeks later, in a converted warehouse space in South Seattle that smelled like fresh paint and industrial cleaner, And faintly, the coffee from the shop 2 doors down. 17 teenagers stood in front of 17 cameras and listened to Amani explain the difference between photographing a thing and seeing it. The space was theirs now, not borrowed, not dependent on a church's scheduling generosity or community center's available evenings. The equipment was new, not ostentatious, not the most expensive available, but solid and reliable and sufficient for the work. The editing stations along the far wall were installed and configured. The second instructor, a woman named Rosa, who had been teaching photography at a community college for 12 years and had been waiting for a program like this with the specific patience of someone who knows what they're waiting for, was at the other end of the room helping a 15-year-old named Darius navigate the manual settings on his camera body. Amani watched Darius's face when the image on the screen came into focus the way he wanted it. The expression a person makes when something clicks. Not the manufactured expression, not the performance of learning, but the private, involuntary face of actual understanding. She had been watching for that expression for 4 years in a borrowed basement, and she had never gotten tired of it. She turned back to the group. "What does it mean to see something?" she said. "Not point at it, see it." A girl named Kezia, who was 13 and had been in the program for 3 weeks and had already demonstrated a compositional instinct that Imani found startling, raised her hand. "It means you have to actually care about it. Say more." Kezia turned the camera over in her hands, thinking. If you just want a picture of a thing, you point the camera at it and press the button. But if you actually care about it, you wait. You move around it. You think about what you want people to feel when they look at it. "Yes," Imani said. "Exactly that." She walked them through the afternoon. Light management, the relationship between aperture and time, the question of what you include and what you leave out, and why that question is never finished. She talked about failure, about the hundreds of shots that don't work for everyone that does, and how the ones that don't work are not wasted because they are the education that makes the next one possible. She did not mention last Friday night. She did not mention the video, which had settled at 4.2 million views and was still occasionally resurfacing in the feeds of people who had missed it the first time. She did not talk about the rooftop lounge or the champagne or the cloth or the tip on the bar or the question in the elevator lobby or any of the rest of it, because none of that was the subject of this room. The subject of this room was the work, and the work was sufficient. At 5 o'clock, she let them go. Rosa stayed to lock up. Imani put on her jacket and picked up her camera bag and walked out into the South Seattle evening, which was cool and moving toward dark with the specific quality of a September evening that knows summer is technically over but hasn't fully committed to autumn yet. She was halfway to her car when she stopped. The man was standing at the far end of the parking lot, not near her car, not blocking anything, just standing in the specific, self-contained way she had recognized the first time she'd seen him, occupying a space without requiring it to adjust for him, which she had come to understand was not a posture or an affectation, but simply how he existed in the world. He was wearing a dark jacket over a gray shirt. No gloves tonight. His hands were at his sides and the tattoos were visible in the parking lot light. Intricate, dense, covering both hands and disappearing up his wrists. She walked toward him. Not because she was certain she should, because she had decided in the 6 weeks since Seattle that she was going to stop making decisions based on what she was certain of and start making them based on what she understood to be true, which was a different and more demanding standard. She stopped 4 feet from him, the same distance he had maintained in the elevator lobby. "The program opened today," she said. "I know." "Song Yu's foundation." He said nothing. "It was you," she said, not as an accusation, as a fact she was placing on the table between them to see what he did with it. He looked at her for a moment. In the parking lot light, his face had the same quality it had had in the lounge. Present, attentive, not performing patience but actually patient, in the way of someone who has learned that most things worth understanding take longer than the first pass. "The foundation made a decision based on your work," he said. "That decision was made by people qualified to make it. But you're connected to the foundation. I support several organizations. And last Friday, what happened in the lounge after I left?" He was quiet for a beat. People were given information that was relevant to them. About the people who... About themselves, he said. About decisions they had made that had consequences they had chosen not to consider. She thought about that. The wind moved through the parking lot, and she pulled her jacket tighter, and he didn't move at all, as though the temperature was a fact he had registered and filed away and had no further relationship with. "Are they okay?" she said. He looked at her. The question had surprised him, she could tell, not by any large external signal, but by a very small adjustment in his expression, a fractional quality of reassessment. "Define okay." "I don't want people destroyed," she said. "I want to be clear about that. What happened to me that night was real, and it was wrong. But I don't want people destroyed over it." "No one was destroyed," he said. "People are managing consequences of their own making. That is not the same thing." She nodded slowly. The girl, Vanessa, is working with her attorney on a disclosure process related to a real estate matter. Her father is cooperating, reluctantly. The families affected by that matter are being located and compensated. She absorbed this. "That has nothing to do with me." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. Those were existing facts that needed existing channels. You were not the cause of it. You were—" He paused. For the first time in either of their conversations, she watched him search for a word. "The occasion," he said finally, "for things that were already true to become unavoidable." The occasion. She turned that over. The ferry, the waterfront, the boy getting up from the pavement over and over. The girl on the piling who had looked at the camera with complete openness. She thought about what it meant to be the occasion for something. Not the cause, not the agent, but the presence that made the truth of something visible to the people who needed to see it. "Why are you here tonight?" she said. He reached into his jacket. He produced a small case, the kind used for memory cards, padded, black. He held it out to her. She took it. She looked at it, then at him. "From the lounge," he said. "It was on the floor of the dance floor. My people found it when they recovered the bag. I was told the bag had been returned, but this was overlooked." She opened the case. A memory card. She looked at it for a moment. She looked at him. "This has 6 hours of Seattle on it," she said. "I know." "You could have mailed it." "I could have," he said. She closed the case. She held it in one hand and looked at him and understood, without needing it explained, that this was both exactly what it was and also something else entirely. A man who had done something significant for reasons that were his own, and who had come here tonight because there was one thing left unfinished, and he was the kind of person who didn't leave things unfinished, and who was standing in a parking lot in South Seattle at 5 in the evening because the alternative was to let the story end without the people in it having actually looked at each other. "I don't know what to call you," she said. "Min Jae," he said. "My name is Min Jae." She nodded. "Imani." "I know." She almost laughed. Not from humor exactly, but from the specific involuntary response to a situation that is simultaneously absurd and exactly right. "Of course you do," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of a man who has long ago stopped performing warmth, but who is not, in fact, without it. "The program," he said. "The one that opened today. How many students?" 17. Capacity for 24 with the current space. "And next year? We'll see what the kids bring in." He nodded. He looked at the warehouse building, the clean windows, the new signage that Kezia had designed, the light still on inside where Rosa was locking up. He looked at it the way he had looked at her that night in the lounge, with the full, unhurried attention of someone who is seeing a thing and not just pointing at it. "It's good work," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." They stood in the parking lot for another moment with the evening moving around them and the city doing its thing in every direction, and neither of them with anything left that required saying. Then she put the memory card case in her camera bag. She zipped the front pocket. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "For the card. For the program. For the question in the elevator." He looked at her for a moment. "You answered it correctly," he said. "Most people don't." She started walking toward her car. She got 3 steps before she stopped and turned back, not because there was anything left to resolve, but because she was a photographer, and she had spent her life understanding the value of the last image, the one you take after you think you're done. He was already walking away, toward a dark car at the far end of the lot that she hadn't noticed, where a figure was holding the rear door open with the practiced patience of someone who did this every day. He walked the way he had walked across that lounge. Not fast, not slow, not performing anything, just moving through the world with the specific quality of someone who has made his decisions and is not in the habit of revisiting them. She watched him until the car door closed. The car moved through the lot and turned into the street and was absorbed by the regular traffic of the evening in the quiet, unannounced way that things with real weight tend to move. She stood for a moment in the empty lot. Then she turned and looked at the building. Through the window, she could see Rosa at the back of the room, moving between the editing stations, shutting down equipment. The overhead lights were warm. On one of the monitors, she could see it from the parking lot, just barely. An image was still visible, something one of the kids had shot that afternoon. She couldn't make out what it was from here. A figure, she thought. Someone in motion. She thought about going back inside to look at it more closely. She decided to let it wait for Saturday, when the kids would be back and could tell her what they'd been trying to say with it, which was always more interesting than what she could determine on her own. She got in her car. She sat for a moment before starting it, one hand on the wheel, looking through the windshield at the street where the dark car had turned and disappeared. She thought about the question one more time. Are you leaving because you want to, or because they decided you should? She had answered it one way in the elevator lobby with a room full of people filming her and a man she didn't know asking from 6 feet away. She would have given the same answer in the parking lot tonight, in the quiet, in the dark, with no one watching. That, she thought, was the only version of an answer that meant anything. She started the car. She pulled out of the lot. She drove south through the city toward the apartment she'd extended her stay to keep for another 2 weeks because the light in Seattle in September was not something she was ready to leave. And because she had 17 students who were just beginning to understand the difference between pointing a camera at something and actually seeing it, and because the program had opened today and there was work left to do and she intended to do it. The city passed around her, lit and moving and indifferent in the way cities are indifferent, which is not the same as hostile, just large and ongoing and full of people in the middle of their own decisions, their own occasions, their own moments of discovering what they were made of when the room turned against them. She turned on the radio. A song she didn't know. She left it on anyway. 4 blocks from the apartment, at a red light, she picked up her camera from the passenger seat. The habit, the reflex, the thing she did whenever light or motion or human truth presented itself. And she photographed the intersection through the windshield. The cross-traffic moving. The pedestrian with the umbrella he didn't need tonight but carried anyway. The couple at the corner who were clearly arguing about something and were clearly going to work it out because of the specific way they were standing, turned toward each other even in the argument, unable to quite fully face away. The light changed. She put the camera down. She drove. She didn't look at the shot until later that night, and when she did, she found it was the 3rd image from the Seattle trip that she thought might be something more than good. Not because of the composition or the light or the technical elements, though those were all there. Because of the couple, because of the turn toward, because of the fact that the argument and the unwillingness to fully face away existed in the same frame, and the frame held both of them without having to resolve the tension between them, and that, she had always believed, was what photographs were for. She backed up the card. She made her tea. She sat by the window. The city was quiet now, the way cities are quiet after midnight. Not silent, but reduced. The volume turned to something that left room for individual things to be heard. A car. A voice, somewhere, laughing. Rain beginning again against the glass, soft and steady. The kind of Seattle rain that doesn't announce itself, but simply arrives and stays. She sat with it. She did not think about the video or the lounge or the champagne or the balloons or the darkness of the room at the end of an evening that had started as a disaster and become something she did not yet have a full word for. She did not think about Vanessa Harlow in a hotel chair at 2 a.m, watching her own face in a video, or about Richard Fenton and the math of consequences, or about a man named Theo Radner, who she had never met and never would, who was going to spend a very long time learning whether aggression was actually a toolkit or just a habit he'd mistaken for one. She did not think about Minji exactly. She thought about the question. The distinction between those two things was also something she did not yet have a full word for. What she knew was this. She had walked into a room, and a room had decided who she was, and she had refused to accept the decision, and the refusal had cost her something, and had also, eventually, in ways she hadn't chosen and couldn't have predicted, meant something to people she would never meet on 6 continents, who had watched her face do the thing her face did when she was holding on to who she was under conditions designed to make her forget. And a man she didn't know had watched from a corner table and had asked her one question and had then made the world slightly more precise, not by creating a different truth, but by routing the existing one to the people who needed it. And 17 kids in a warehouse space in South Seattle now had cameras in their hands, and someone who believed their stories were worth telling and the time and space and equipment to begin learning how. None of that was easy. None of it was clean. It had cost something from everyone it had touched, in ways large and small, and some of what it had cost was fair and some of it was complicated, and some of it would take years to fully understand. But the program had opened today, and the light in Seattle in September was not something she was ready to leave, and there was work left to do. She sat by the window with her tea and her camera and the rain against the glass, and outside the city went on being itself, large and ongoing and full of people in the middle of becoming what the pressure of their lives would eventually reveal them to be. And Imani Brooks, travel photographer, Saturday morning teacher, woman who tipped on the bar in the middle of the humiliation, sat in the quiet of a room she had paid for herself and did not look away from any of it.